Hi there, I'm Dr. Nate Storey from Bright Agritech, and this is Aquaponics Academy, episode number 9. This will be the second part of the podcast where I'm discussing the fundamentals of system design. In the first one, we covered what needs you have for your aquaponic systems or hydroponic system, how you can best fulfill these needs, and we also talked about some of my ideas on what we here at Bright Agritech think is important when it comes to aquaponic system designs. Today we're going to talk about the main pieces you need to consider when designing a system. Namely, how do you design for the crops that you're growing, for the markets you're servicing, for use as a grower, and how do you design a system that scales? So how do you design a system that you can add on to, a system that you can make bigger over time instead of having to go back to the drawing board, tear everything out, and start from scratch? So, as part of this, we're going to talk about what types of system designs are out there. And again, I'm going to launch into some of my personal design philosophies. And we're going to talk about how you design problems out of the system before you build. And finally, we're going to dive into how to make the right decisions when designing a system. So what are the things that you need to be thinking about that you wouldn't be thinking about otherwise? It's going to be a packed show, so buckle up.
Welcome to Aquaponics Academy, a Bright Agrotech podcast designed to help you overcome common aquaponic issues, learn new growing techniques, and help you be as successful as you can be as an aquaponic practitioner. Join aquaponics expert Dr. Nate Storey, the creator of Zip Grow Towers, as he breaks down complex topics into easy-to-understand information. And now, here's Dr. Nate Storey.
Alrighty, so when it comes to designing a facility, there's a lot of things that we need to keep in mind. And I always tell people you need to be designing not just for the crop, which is obvious, right? Everyone designs for the crop. They design a system that will allow you to grow crops X, Y, and Z. But they don't always think about the market. So your facility has to reflect how you approach the market. And they don't often think about how they're going to use it. And a great example of this is all of the indoor growers out there who have these stacked bed designs or these stacked raft designs. And to get to them, they have to get in a scissor lift and they go up, basically the equivalent of 2 floors, and they have to reach far out over these stacked racks. Or if it's all at ground level, there's hardly any clearance and they've got to get down on their hands and knees and kind of reach out to get to the plants. These types of systems are not designed with the user in mind. So as a grower, you know that a significant amount of your cost is labor, right? Well, actually, we're not just saying, I shouldn't say significant. The majority of your costs will be labor. So knowing that the majority of your costs are going to be labor as a grower means that if you can design a system that's a little bit easier to use, if you can design a system where your people can move through it and do their jobs more effectively, more efficiently, more quickly, then you save a lot of money in the long term. A lot of money. So when people are looking at systems and all they're thinking about is the plants, they're not thinking about labor costs. They're thinking about the problem wrong. Or maybe they're not approaching it from the wrong perspective. They're just thinking about what's really a four-factor thinking process in terms of one single factor. And that leaves out some of the most important parts, and it's oftentimes why we see so many failures in commercial systems, and so many failures among the people that are trying to get into this as a commercial enterprise. So we're going to dig in, we're going to talk about this a little bit. So designing a facility for your crop. Everyone knows what kind of crops they're interested in, and hopefully you've come to these conclusions by working your way back through the market. And again, let me be clear here. I'm not just talking about commercial markets, right? If you're growing in your backyard for a family, you're growing for a market. If you can't get your kids to eat your produce, then you're growing in vain. So no matter what your market is, whether it's your kids, whether it's crazy Uncle Larry, whether it's a restaurant or a grocery store or a farmer's market, you're always growing for a market. So start at your market and work your way back. Find out what crops are in demand, what crops you can grow, what crops are going to be cost effective for you, and that's the crop you pick. So once you know the crop that you want, you're going to have to pick a technique that is appropriate to that crop, right? So if you're growing tomatoes, then most likely you're looking at a media bed production technique, something like Beto buckets or another media bed technique. They just work the best for tomatoes, right? Tomatoes are a vining crop, and they need to be trained, and they use vertical space really well. So we can use something with media in it to help support that plant, and we can grow great tomatoes that way. I would not use that same technique if I'm trying to grow basil. If I'm trying to grow basil, I'm going to do it in a zip grow tower, right? That's the cheapest, fastest, best way for me to do that. So you have to know what crop you're going to be growing, and then you have to figure out your growing technique from there. So a great example of basically trying a one-size-fits-all when it comes to growing is raft producers who try to grow big, heavy crops in the rafts. And these are, crops like tomatoes in a raft system. And they have big problems, not just because the plants get huge and the root systems are huge and oxygen consumption in that root zone is very high, but also because it's just not appropriate. It just doesn't work. I mean, it needs more anchoring. The root system needs more anchoring, and the plant is very difficult to manage. So think about the crop that you're going to be growing and match your growing technique to the crop that you plan on growing, that you plan on culturing. So that's the first one. And if you guys have any questions there, we've got a lot of material out there on the right way to grow. You, of course, know that we are big fans of zip grow towers. We use zip grow towers on our farms. Most of the farmers using our towers are growing herbs and greens, and that's pretty much what they concentrate on. We grow some other things on occasion, things like peppers, but by and large, we recommend herbs and greens. They're in demand everywhere. They're high margin crops, and they grow really, really well in towers. So that's what we tend to focus on. You have to design a facility for your market, okay? And this, some people will say, well, duh, and other people will say, well, what do you mean? And the reality is that how you design your facility dictates how efficiently you can approach your market, what type of sales techniques you can use, and impacts your ability to meet the market's needs. So a lot of people never even consider this when they're setting up their facility. And this is something, with our indoor growing, with our zip racks, with our indoor growing equipment, this is something that we had in mind from the very beginning. So just to use an example, a lot of these indoor growing setups that are going up now are these big stacked kind of arrays of rafts, stacked arrays of NFT troughs, basically shelves with all of these different products on growing in NFT troughs or growing in rafts, something like that. And, it works. It's basically just taking the horizontal growing technique that you use in a greenhouse and you're putting it on big racks. And, it works. It works. There's no one that questions the biological functionality of it. But when it comes to the market, you're trapped in traditional markets, right? So it's the exact same product that the guys in the greenhouses are doing. Exact same product, grown the exact same way, and it goes to market the exact same way. So the only difference then is the labor cost, right? And the cost of growing. Now, we already know that the labor cost is going to be way higher growing indoors. So we know they're at a disadvantage. They didn't design their facility for their market in a creative way, right? They're just taking something done in a greenhouse and now they're doing it inside. To kind of explain how we think about designing for the market, when we design indoor growing operations, we do them on these zip racks, right? They're these modular racks. They roll around. And basically, towers hang on both sides, and we've got lights on racks that travel between the two rows of these zip racks, and they illuminate towers. The towers face the center aisle where the lights are shining in both directions, and those towers are illuminated by those lights. Well, for a grower, this means that you can basically plant these towers, hang them on a rack, stick them in the system, plug everything in, and they get irrigated. And then once they're grown out, you unplug them, you take them out of the main irrigation system, you move the entire rack. Instead of moving a single tower or a single plant, move the entire rack, you roll it onto a truck, you roll it into a grocery store, and it can be a point of sale type thing, right on the rack it was grown on. So that's an example of thinking about a facility in terms of the market you want to approach. So we want to approach the live sales market. That's where we have great margins. That's where we make a lot of money. And that's really the market we're interested in servicing. So we design the equipment to match the market, to match the needs of the market, the needs of the grower, the needs of the plants. That's thinking about it in 3 dimensions, really, instead of 2. So that's what I'm talking about when I say design your facility to meet the needs of your market and to match the market. The third thing that we need to be thinking about when we're talking about designing a facility is designing it for the user, right? So this is a really probably the most common mistake I see made in most designs. And what this is people design a system they will confuse biological feasibility, will the plant grow, with can the plant be grown, right? So a great example of this is like really cluttered systems, or systems that don't think about how humans have to move through the system itself, how humans have to use the system. And there are a ton of these out there, just cluttered, gangly systems that are very difficult to move through. And what it represents is it means that your major cost, the labor, goes up even higher, because now you're not paying people to do work, you're paying people to try and move through your greenhouse to do their work. And there's a big distinction there, and it represents a lot of cost for growers. So we have to think about how we interact with these systems that we build. One of the reasons we went to these zip racks for indoor growing is because now, instead of moving these small amounts of product around, you can just walk in with a single person and you can move the entire rack to processing, move the entire rack onto a truck, do whatever you need, just one person. And that's the beauty of designing a system for the user, is you can really significantly reduce your costs. And if your competitors have not been designing their systems to be used, then your margins are going to be better than them. So for those of you who are just kind of home and hobby growers, this is just as important. And a lot of people design systems that become difficult for them to use. And I always tell people, if it's hard for you to use, you're not going to use it, right? If you're taking tests of your pH, your nitrate, that kind of thing are difficult for you, you're not going to do them. If you don't do them, your system is less healthy, or you're not responding to your system appropriately. If you're not responding to your system appropriately, your system performs poorly, and pretty soon you've got all these problems, and that difficult to use system is now a really unhealthy system that's not working very well. So even for home growers, it's really important to be thinking about the usability. How am I going to interact with it? Are there clear aisleways? Can I access my plants? Do I have to bend over? Do I have to lean in? How am I interacting with the plants in the system at any given time? And if you can't imagine it being easy, then don't do it. Always make it easy. It has to be easy for you to do. If you don't have access to your plants, there's a major red flag. Guys that do stacked, layers of production, if you cannot see to the middle of that stack and you cannot monitor your plants visually or by hand, then you've designed it wrong, right? You've designed it wrong. You have to be able to access your plants. You have to check on them. You have to check them for pests. You have to check them for diseases, deficiencies, all of these things. And if it's difficult for you to get in and check your plants for deficiency, you're not going to do it. And if you don't do it, then you end up with a lot of dead plants. So it's really, really, really important to think about not just will the system work, but can I use this system, and is it simple to use? The last thing I want to talk about here are designing your system to scale. So that's designing a system that is going to be easy to add on to. And this is another thing that a lot of people don't think about. A lot of the time because they don't really have aspirations initially to expand their system. But I tell you, if you start a system and it's going really well, the natural kind of progression of thoughts on it are going to be to add a little bit more, to add a little bit more. And the easier you make it to do that at the beginning in the design phase, the more likely you're going to have a really headache-free expansion down the road. So be thinking about scaling. And this is one reason I'm a huge fan of in-ground sumps, because if I just use one single sump tank, I can add anything I want to above ground. I may have to upgrade my pump at some point, but honestly, like off of a 300-gallon sump, right now we run a 4,000-gallon system, probably 350, 400 towers, depending. Off of that, just an IBC, so roughly 300 gallons, 275 gallons, and we run the entire system on that, and we could probably double or triple or even quadruple the system size and use that same sump, and we'd be all right. So that's with our particular design. I'll throw that caveat out there. But we designed the system so that we could scale it very easily. We designed it so that we could add on to it, that we could cut off a pipe, put on a fitting, and go with it. And I will tell you, valves are helpful, and poly pipe is very helpful. And I'll just leave it at that. But the more valves that you have in the system, the more ability you have to turn off the zone, replumb it, turn it back on again, the faster and easier it is to add on to systems. And if you've got a sump, of course, you're in great shape. And if you're using poly tubing, even better, because that stuff is not just inexpensive, but it's very easy to work with, and it's very easy to scale with. So think about your plant production techniques. If you're using towers, you're set. Zip grow towers are very easy to scale. Some gravel beds can be good for scaling, or media beds. Other things like rafts can be a little bit more difficult. So be thinking about your layout, be thinking about your space, and be thinking about how you would add on if you wanted to. So those are the big design questions, right? The next thing is you have to know what kind of designs are out there in order to make any good decisions. So we've got a lot of material on this, so I won't go into too much detail, but really you're talking NFT, right? If you're doing hydro, NFT doesn't work so great in aquaponics because of the solids. You've got raft systems, right? And these are mostly used in the tropics. That's usually where they're cost effective. In northern climates, raft systems are not as cost effective. And you've got zip grow towers, of course. If you're an aquaponic producer, you're probably familiar with zip grow towers. Most of our hydroponic growers, of course, are using zip grow towers in hydroponic systems as well. So you've got zip grow towers. And, there's a few other kind of miscellaneous systems or xeroponic systems out there which don't get used at all in aquaponic systems because of the solids. But you can, of course, use them in hydroponic systems. They're just not widely used because they've never really been commercially viable. But that's just kind of a very brief introduction to what's out there. Please go out there and do some research because the more you know about options when it comes to systems, the more likely you are to make the right decisions. And you can definitely check out our website. We've got a lot of information out there on setting up your system and getting everything going, of course, with zip grow towers. Kind of the third part of this is you have to design the problems out of your system at the beginning. And this is a really hard thing to say because a lot of folks, when they're first getting started, a lot of folks don't know what the problems could be. But it's really just kind of a critical thinking process. I am convinced that almost anyone can nail down a majority. We're talking 90, 95% of the potential problems with their system on the front end. So this is looking at your system, looking at your design. Where are the high points? Where are the low points? Are you operating under pressure? Are there going to be problems with solids? How do we take those solids out? Do we have a grade that's going to support drainage to our in-ground sump? Well, these are all the questions that we ask on the front end. And some of it, you just learn through the school of hard knocks. You build a system and you have problems, so you fix the problem. And then the next time you build a system, you don't have that problem anymore. But, there's a lot of things, even if you've not built a system before, that you can figure out. And make sure that you're troubleshooting your designs in your head on the front end, because if you get into a system and your irrigation is not efficiently designed, you've got an issue. And, there's some rules of thumb there. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right? With plumbing, eliminating angles is always good. Operating under pressure is always good. Making sure that you have enough electricity for everything you're going to be running. This is a good thing. Making sure that you're not going to have dissolved oxygen problems. Is your system turbulent? Are you turning it over at least once or twice every hour? Minimally once an hour, preferably twice an hour, right? Are the plant root zones going to be aerobic? Are you delivering too much waste? Are you delivering too much water? Asking these questions and then critically thinking through how you're designing your system to make sure that you don't have these issues, this is a good thing. And it's a good practice to get into because you'll find yourself doing it even as you get deeper and deeper into the build. So you'll find yourself building something and you'll start looking at it, thinking about it, and you'll go, no, this isn't going to work. I'm going to tear this out, replace it with poly, put a valve here, whatever. So designing problems out of the system, this is a difficult thing to encourage you to do because it's more a way of thinking. It's more of a discipline than it is just something you can do. You have to sit down, you have to apply your brain to it, you have to think about it for a while, and you have to get in the habit of being critical of what you're doing. You have to get in the habit of questioning what you're doing, questioning whether it's the best possible route for you, and trying to figure out if there's something better. So this is an ongoing process. No one is good at it right off the bat. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask. We design a lot of systems these days, and we've gotten to the point where we can basically drop in a system custom designed from someone, and it works right off the bat. But that was really hard-won knowledge. It took us a long time and a lot of mistakes, and I guarantee you there are no stupid mistakes out there that we have not done at some point. So, yeah, definitely check out some of our mistakes people make. We've got some blog posts. We've got some other things that will certainly help in that regard. So the last part of this is really just how to make the right decisions when you're designing a system. How do we think about the problem? How do we think about the problem in a way that leads us to correct it, right? Like I said, a lot of these things are truly visible on the front end. And if we're thinking critically about what we're doing, a lot of problems can be corrected before they even start. So think critically about what you're doing, educate yourself, talk with an expert, talk with someone who knows what they're doing, talk with someone who's done it before, check out other systems, and just make sure that you're thinking about your problems the right way. Turning a blind eye is not going to help you in the long run. Correcting it now before it gets out of hand, before you spend months of frustration dealing with a problem is the way to go. It's amazing to me how many people have a small problem that they decline to fix, and then they'll spend the next 2 or 3 months just fighting the problem. And you're just like, dude, this is a 1-hour replumbing job. 1 hour, $15. Just replumb it, save yourself hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of frustration and irritation. And it's really a joy-stealing thing. So learning how to think about the problems in your aquaponics system, it's an ongoing process, but please do learn how to do it. The second part of making the right decisions is making sure that you're designing through an economic lens, right? And everyone always says, well, I'm a backyard, I'm a home and hobby grower. And I'm like, well, if you're not subject to economic laws, man, I envy you. But most of us have a significant other who's going to put the kibosh on our hobby if we exceed our budget. Or, if you're growing commercially, of course, if you are not thinking about your problems economically, if you're not trying to make your decisions through an economic lens, you're going to make the wrong decisions and you're going to go out of business. So thinking about things economically, don't think about biological functionality. Right? Plants are easy to grow. I always tell people, I can grow a plant anywhere. That's not the problem. The problem is selling that plant. The problem is making money on that plant. And if we can't do that, then we've got much bigger issues, right? So you can grow a plant anywhere. This is really true. You can grow a plant anywhere, but you can't sell it anywhere. And you can't always sell it for more than you paid to grow it. So thinking about things economically will help us make the right decisions, both when it comes to system design and implementation, as well as our markets. The third part of making the right decisions is going to be being realistic about what you can accomplish with the system, okay? And I always have to really rein some people in. And I always have to talk with some people and just constantly be saying, hey, have a bigger vision, right? So some people have a much bigger idea of what they can accomplish with their system than I think is reasonable, honestly. Some people want to come in, they want to kick off this big, $1.5 million system, and they want to grow 15 different crops, and they want to sell here and they want to sell there, and they're just full of all these great ideas, and they want to rule the world. But, the reality is you've got to start smaller, and you've got to understand your market a little better, and it's probably not going to be as exciting as you think it will be, and maybe you should just do a couple of crops. Get good at a few things, figure out the market for a few things, and be strategic. Don't be small-minded when it comes to your strategy, but be strategic about the crops that you choose and what you choose to invest to get those things to market. So once you get those to market, then you can expand, but then you understand the market and you understand the folly of trying to grow something you can't sell. You understand the folly of certain crops in certain markets, and this happens all the time, whether it's microgreens, whether it's this, whether it's that. There's always kind of a fad, and people get really excited about it without understanding, for instance, the labor component. How much labor will this cost? There's a reason microgreens have traditionally costed, $20 a pound. That's a big number, it seems like, but when you factor in the amount of labor and packaging and care that goes into producing those microgreens, your margins get smaller and smaller and smaller. So these are things to think about. Other folks, they need a bigger vision, right? People will come to me and they'll say, oh, I'm in, this market. They'll name some big metropolitan area, and they're like, I've got a couple of small local food stores that I think would take my product, and yeah, I could sell it at a couple other restaurants. And I look at them, I'm just like, you have got to be kidding me. You're in one of the sweetest markets in the U.S. You can kill it. You can just kill it, man. So think bigger. Start there, certainly start there, but you have to design your system, and you have to put your business plan together, and you have to be thinking about the future in terms of this huge market that you want to access and how you're going to do that, because the groundwork that you lay right now as a small business is what's going to enable you or hold you back when it comes time to scale effortlessly or reasonable or with less effort. I mean, no scaling is effortless, right? But with less effort, easily into some of these larger markets as a producer. So keep these things in mind. Think about your problems. Learn how to think about your problems. Think about everything through an economic light, through an economic lens, and be realistic about what you can accomplish with your system. Okay? So that's pretty much it. Today, we really appreciate you tuning in. We talked a little bit about designing your facility, designing for the crop, designing for the market, designing for the user, and designing to scale. Those are the 4 things we design for. Make sure you understand what system designs are out there. Make sure you design as many problems out of your system on the front end as possible. And this means educating yourself and talking with someone who knows what they're doing and saying, hey, will this work? And a lot of the time they'll say, no, that won't work. There you just save yourself a lot of time and money. We also talked about how to make the right decisions when designing systems. So learn how to think about your problems. Again, think about everything through an economic lens and be realistic about what you can do with your system. So thanks so much for tuning in to the second part of our Fundamentals of System Design. This is, of course, the second podcast. This is a two-parter. So the first one's already been posted. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, make sure you head over to iTunes and download that one. And while you're there, we'd love to hear your feedback on how the podcast is going so far. Oh, it's on Stitcher too, so feel free to check it out on Stitcher. And let us know how it's going. And we'd invite you to leave a nice review if you're finding these podcasts useful. So, of course, when other people look at these things, if there's a good review or two, that makes them more likely to listen to it, and pretty soon more people have the opportunity to learn and engage over these kind of topics. So please do leave a review. Thanks so much for being part of our podcast community, and we'll look forward to the next podcast, and we'll thanks so much for listening. We'll look forward to getting you the next one in the Aquaponics Academy series.